for coming on this morning. So we have, if people don't know, Ali Ormerod, Michael's daughter. We have Barry Lewis, who's a sort of photographer and contemporary of Michael's. We have Zelda Cheatle, who put on the first ever show of Michael's work back in 1993. So it's lovely to kind of bring that full circle for this latest exhibition. And we have David Ormerod, who is Michael's brother. So everybody's going to sort of, I guess, bring a little bit of different information about Michael and be here to kind of, talk about his work and about how it all sort of pieces together, how it's come from, I guess, the origins of getting this book, the first ever book, States of America, produced back in 1993 to coincide with Zelda's exhibition, to this one today, which Ali has very much been involved with getting off the ground, the New American Landscapes book, and this exhibition that we put on today. I'm Richard from Kalman, Brighton, who's kind of helped organise the show. So that's sort of introductions. I'm going to leave it to Zelda, who's far more practiced at this sort of stuff, if that's all right, Zelda, to carry on from there.
What is so nice is that here in the audience, this is Michael's brother. Here we have Jeff and Alan, who have been working with Annie on making a new book and this exhibition. And we have got two of Michael's children actually here, which is fantastic. And it's just very nice that Barry and Michael, I mean, Barry and I have known each other a long time, but Barry's kind of life journey has been very similar to Michael's, in that he trained in something else, worked in something else, came to photography a little bit later, and then, in fact, there's great parallels in the way that they actually have envisioned the world, and some of the locations, even in this exhibition, are the same locations that Barry has actually photographed in. I mean, I think when Pete Dyer, who's the designer of the original softback book, which Richard has got, and in fact there are copies on eBay, but it's very hard to find now.
Beautiful book.
Whenever Pete Dyer brought the pictures in to show me initially, I just was bowled over by, first of all, I really liked his vision, and the colour and the black and white were equally strong. But what I thought was, here is someone who's paying this great homage to all of the great American photographers. I could see Robert Frank, I could see Paul Strand, I could see Walker Evans, I could see Gary Winogrand, I could see Lee Friedlander, and I could see William Eggleston, and I just thought, wow, this is someone who is really paying tribute, who really, truly understands photographic history. And I just wish that he could still have continued on and that terrible accident hadn't happened, because this was the beginning of what would have been this amazing kind of odyssey into photography that I feel like he'd only just started. But I mean, what is lovely is that 30 years on, I still feel completely as energized by looking at these pictures and in awe of what he actually was seeing. So that is, I think, now I'll hand over to Barry, because Barry has got a very, very interesting perception and has always liked Michael's work.
Yeah. Well, we never met, so it'd be interesting. How many people ever hands up for people who met Mike? I can't put my hand up. It's kind of strange because a lot of photographers never meet. I've got so many, but now we kind of somehow correspond through social media. But you often don't meet photographers. You meet a lot of writers. Most of my work was actually. I'll go back a bit. I was also an engineer. In fact, anyone who's old enough, there was a thing called Young Scientist of the Year. It was a BBC thing for inventors, and I was the first winner of. I haven't told many people that, but then I started doing sex and drugs and rock and roll at university, and I did chemistry, and then I was a teacher. But we were born. He was a year older, so I'll show him respect. And photography was a hobby. I think I started when I watched Blow Up. I saw the film Blow Up, and the next day I bought a camera.
If you haven't seen that film, watch it.
It changed everything. And I was very lucky because, I gave up my teaching job because I just thought I've got to try and do it as succeed as a photographer. And I took a job as a technician for a year, and during that time, the lecturer didn't turn up, so I ended up having to do the teaching at a poly. And then I heard that the Royal College, by having a science degree, I could get in there. So I spent 2 years under Bill Brandt, the photographer, and there's only 6 students, so we're treated like royalty. And we had a big group. That's where my life was different. I was just very lucky. There were so few students there. When I finished, I got an award to spend a year on Vogue magazine, and then I started working for the Colour magazine. So I was always hitchhiking on the back of magazine work to do this type of travel. Not, every photographer's America is different. I think we of a certain age are brought up with TV, all of the kind of first of all it's the cowboys, and then it's the Hawaii 5-0, 77 Sunset Strip, film noir. America was so big. Most of the things you saw on TV were kind of American based, so there was this kind of huge mystery. I was quite lucky in '68. I kind of took a year out from college and I went to America. I worked on the railway, and then I travelled on greyhounds and hitched. But I wasn't taking pictures then, and it was only, I think we almost started exactly at the same time travelling around. But he did it in a lot more methodical way. Mine was just on the back of, I used to get stories and go on. I'm not sure, I can't say a lot. I remember Zelda's show, and I thought I remembered the book, but from the book, what I remembered, the early work, it was the colour. It was this kind of beautiful kind of, that looks like a large format colour actually. He was obviously very, very, the colour's stunning. I don't know, did he use Kodachrome?
It was all colour neg.
It's colour neg?
Yeah, colour neg, yeah.
Wow. I didn't think you could get that quality out of colour neg.
It has this nostalgic kind of feel, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, the colours are quite muted.
really muted. And I think the colour's so, I think, very, very different with black and white. His black and white is a lot more, not just the fact that it's black and white, people tend to be more important than the pictures. A lot of the colour, where there's a figure, except for the boy with the mask, but even that, he's behind a mask, the figures are usually subsumed by this urban landscape. But the black and white, I just feel more Robert Frank there, more Stephen Shaw, or Wim Wenders is the person that...
Yes, Wim Wenders' Polaroids have a great similarity, don't they?
Yeah, similar feel. And he was working exactly the same period. Wim Wenders started that.
Yeah.
When he's building up for Paris, Texas, he was
Yep.
shooting Polaroids all the time, traveling around. But in a way, I think that's my bit. I don't want to kind of, because I feel a bit like an imposter syndrome being here. But I wonder whether he would have gone whether he'd have gone into the academic world, which was one way of surviving, or gone into working for colour magazines, which is what I started to do. And then I worked for National Geographic and Life magazine, so I worked in America a lot. And for a while, I did a little book on it. I was in Miami Beach. I had a place there, and I always used to go to Miami. And I just used to love it. But I think I was lucky because it was very good money, and it's not the same anymore. But in those days, it was very good money being a photographer. You could earn enough, so you could buy yourself time to go off and do your own work. I'm very curious how he financed these trips. That's all I can say, because a lot of it is just questioning what, I'm looking from the outside in, going via the pictures. I just know America was much cheaper then. I think it was $3 to the pound. Oh.
Well, I guess he was teaching then, wasn't he? So is that David, how he was sort of making a living through?
Because you were living in America at the time.
Well, yes, he formed a little commercial photography company.
Okay.
So he was taking pictures of cereal boxes and shoes and things. But Jeff knows a lot more about that than I do. It was in Jeff's time.
I know probably less about his business, but his teaching, I spent over 30 years teaching at Newcastle College, which is where I met Alan, who worked with me on the book. And Michael came there to do some part-time teaching. I think he, if I remember right, he did 2 or 3 days a week.
3 days a week.
And so, and then I think the rest of the time he would work on his commercial work. And he really enjoyed the teaching, and you know, it wouldn't surprise you to know that he brought the same enthusiasm that he brought to everything to teaching. And you know, there are people here, and there are students around who will will talk about that and what a big influence it was on them.
But his major love, he was doing everything to allow him to go and do this.
Yeah.
So he'd work throughout the year, and then every summer he'd come out to America for 3 months, 8, 10 or 12 weeks, buy an old van,
Right.
and live out the van and travel.
So you slept in the van.
Slept in the van,
Yeah.
climbed on top of it and stuff.
And was he mostly on his own, or did he have?
Well, he was with Anne's mum a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And Anne's mum, I think, came out on 2 of those trips. So.
Yeah.
I saw him occasionally when he came to my part of the States. I was there for 3 years. But this was his love. And he, this is his first time actually he used colour when he came to America for his last trip.
Oh, really? Wow.
And
That's
he had this terrible accident where he was run down by a huge truck.
Yeah.
And his car turned over and rolled and caught fire, and he was thrown out,
Right.
but didn't survive. And I found a lot of his cassettes actually in the sand. It's in Arizona.
Right.
Film cassettes.
Film cassettes.
Yeah.
And so all these colours came from those film cassettes that I found on the
And you
ground.
found them in the sand.
In the sand.
Wow.
And he'd lost a lot of cassettes were burnt up in the car.
Right.
So with no idea what was on that.
Well,
One
why?
interesting thing he said, I spoke to him the day before he died, and he said he decided he'd done enough for America for the moment.
Right.
He was going to then take on Soviet Russia,
Oh, wow.
which was going to be his next campaign. But he never made it, unfortunately. That was when Gorbachev, I think, was just about still
Yeah.
there, I think.
Mum has a letter from him saying, when I get back, I want to take us all on holiday to Russia.
Field
You were
trip.
thrilled.
Those were the days.
But his main mention of this was with Jeff.
Yeah.
And he was very devoted to you, I think, wasn't he?
We were good buddies. Yeah, we were good buddies.
And
We talked a lot about photography.
much of what he learned was from Jeff. He also
Wow.
spent an awful lot of his time, as you detected, looking at other people's photographs,
Yeah.
writing books, looking for all the time. He spent time looking at others' photographs. And so that's how he's got these derivatives in his work.
And I think I don't feel it's derivative. I think it's like
Yeah,
paying
yeah,
tribute,
yeah.
great tribute to the people that have kind of shaped the history of photography.
Yeah, let me just say one little thing about his personality. He's very liberal, extraordinarily outward-going. He had loads of friends. His attitude in life was quality, not quantity, not quality. He didn't care about money, and he took all kinds of. He was slightly mad, and he took all kinds of risks. He told the biggest whoppers that ever starkly, in front of people who knew that it didn't faze him. But he had loads of friends, and he had an attitude. Of course, he was very rather left-wing and liberal. But basically, he came to America, and he got very interested in kind of the peripheral aspects of America, at the edges. So he looked at American society and started looking at the edges of that society.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. That interested me anyway.
Yeah.
But he was terribly good with his Leica on street photography.
Yeah. There's definitely something about the sort of margins of society
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
work. And,
Yeah. So that was. He didn't particularly like America much.
Right.
He did like America. He did like American society. He loved the countryside. But
Well, something like the picture of the Indian standing in the cemetery,
yeah.
I think that is like, of all the people photographs, I mean, the girl with the bubble gum and that
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
the Indian standing, they're really precious moments, aren't they? But they're also indicative of what he was thinking about America, I think.
Yeah.
anyway, I've said enough.
No, I think there's a lot more
I-
we need to find out.
I was just going to ask, Jeff, do you know? I mean, what did he have a sort of plan? I mean, you know, now everybody, you know, obviously I work with lots of contemporary photographers. Everybody's got a plan. Everybody's sort of working towards the ambition of, you know, this project or a book or whatever it might be. What was there a sort of a grand sort of plan of what he wanted to do with?
I don't think so. I don't think Michael was that sort of guy.
No,
No, I really don't think
He
so.
wanted to publish.
he did.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess yeah.
For a long, he wanted to get a book together of his American photographs. That,
Right.
you know, so when the first one happened, that was great. But just going back to his photographing people, when he would set a photograph at college for the students to go out and photograph people, he would insist that they spoke to the person. None of this sit and run photography. That was really important to Michael, that anybody he photographed he had some dialogue with. He talked to them,
Not in the street.
wherever.
Yeah.
And so I remember him setting this project, and when the students came back, he asked them, "Tell me about this person," and that says a lot about his personality. I think he was genuinely interested in people more than anybody I ever met. That was the genuine thing. It really was a people person. I mean, we say that about a lot of people, but nobody I ever met was as interested in other people as Michael was. Really.
Well, there's never any sort of, you know, cold detachment that you feel in the pictures of people. You know, there feels like there's a, you know, I don't mean a sort of dialogue, but there feels like he is there and he's sort of been invited in sometimes to a sort of, you know, quiet personal moment, rather than, I think with a lot of photographers of that sort of American scene, whether they're American or kind of British, there's a little bit of a sort of, not looking down your nose, but there's a bit of a sort of attitude, maybe a kind of something towards them, which I never sort of feel with his pictures. I mean, some of them are quirky and kind of funny, but there's not a sort of a coldness to them. You know, the picture that you're talking about, the kind of Native American guy, there's a real sort of tenderness, I think, in that picture.
Yes.
Sorry if you're talking about a picture that people don't know. I mean, it's actually in that book. If people want to pass it around and have a look, but it's
But I think whenever I did the exhibition, it kind of felt with the pictures that were in the book, that were in the show, that he was doing all of these sort of like lonely, the journey across America sort of type pictures, and that he was in a way almost foretelling his own awful end. There's like the pictures of all of the kind of the flies on the windscreen and all of those sort of empty roads where you can see one vehicle travelling at a great distance, and of course that is how he met his death. It's like in a terrible, horrible road accident.
and sorry, go
I was going to
ahead.
ask, how was the exhibition received at the time?
It was amazingly popular. I mean, because nobody had heard his name before, and it was the first time there'd ever been a book. But I mean, I think it was people that had been coming to my gallery anyway because they like photography, but then it was like they were really drawn in to the work. And in fact, I think actually quite a lot of the pictures did sell. I mean, it's in my memory that a lot of the pictures did sell. But what to me was amazing was the number of people that he knew that came in to actually talk about him because they really liked him, and many previous girlfriends. Oh yes, I mean, and all of them were the very special one.
And how did you first come across his work?
Well, because Pete Dyer.
Oh, Pete Dyer.
Pete Dyer came in and said, "I'm working on this book, and would you like to sort of have a look at the pictures?" I was completely bowled over. I thought they were really good.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's maybe about 50 people a week used to come in with ideas for exhibitions. I didn't pick them all up, obviously. But I mean, the same way that you have pictured, that you can see in the pictures kind of who he was.
Yeah, I mean, I opened up a gallery in Brighton about nearly 20 years ago, and you know, I didn't really know what I was doing. My family business had always been galleries. My dad opened up a gallery sort of over 60 years ago in Manchester originally, and then moved down to London and opened up a gallery there. So I guess I kind of thought through osmosis I might know how to run a gallery, which didn't really turn out to be factual. But I had a lot of fun doing it, and it felt like a very sort of exciting time, and photography felt like, I mean, I don't know what it was like for you back in 1993, but I mean, for me in 2005, I think we opened, I really felt like photography was about to kind of explode in kind of interest and as a kind of medium for people to be excited by and hopefully kind of buy prints of. It didn't really turn out to be the case, actually. I mean, I think it's, I think maybe in the last half dozen years, it finally is beginning to feel like that in the UK. But it's been very, very sort of slow burn. So I was basically working with, photographers that I'd kind of come across or sort of knew of, whether I'd seen their work in magazines and sort of had approached them. And I was in a kind of lovely little street in the North Lanes of Brighton, and there were a couple of second-hand bookshops along the street. And on kind of quiet afternoons, of which there were very many, I would close up the gallery and I would pop into the bookshop and browse through their books, and they always had a good sort of art section. And I came across the States of America book, and I wasn't really schooled in photography. So there were lots of photographers I didn't kind of know of or know about. But to have had a book produced, I knew even at that time it was not that easy to have a book produce of your work, and being a sort of British photographer particularly, there weren't a huge amount doing that sort of aesthetic, I didn't think, who had books produced. So I just fell in love with the pictures. I mean, a genuine sort of wow. I again, like probably all the rest of us, grew up on a diet of American kind of culture, both I guess cinematically through everything that we saw on screens and musically, and it's incredible how much America in its sort of short space of time has enveloped our sort of cultural imagination, really. But there was definitely something askew, I think, in his pictures of America. They didn't feel like there wasn't the sort of, I was talking about the sort of satire that maybe some Americans sort of feel about their own country, and there was something, I think, that had a sort of humour, that had a British sort of, I don't know, slightly sort of arched eyebrow about some of the pictures, and I really, really liked it. And again, I think particularly for me, the colour photography, because again, I was not dealing with people who were schooled in photography, so their attitude towards black and white photography, or the sort of audiences that I was getting, was less towards black and white photography because of its kind of, I guess, traditions, and maybe more kind of traditional photography kind of buyers were only interested in black and white photography. For me, it was the colour work which really, really sort of sang. Sorry, you wanted to say something?
I'd love to just take this opportunity, if I may, just to share a personal story. And
Yeah.
it links with what you were saying about Michael's approach to life. So I knew Michael for many years, and he was like a big brother to me.
Right.
And he told me to look at the world in a different way. I had no idea he'd already got this body of work behind him when I met him. And he inspired me to look at the world in a different way. And for the first time, I went to the USA in 1991, traveled all the way around it, big tour on my own, went to a lot of the places that he would have gone to himself.
Yeah.
And then I left the USA to travel into South America as Michael flew in on one of his annual trips.
Right.
The intention being that I would go back to Alton, in the village where he lived, and share my experience. Hey Steve, what did you see? Where did you go? And of course, that never happened. So I got back, and it was only years later, or very soon after, that I realised what he'd already compiled.
Yeah.
And that's amazing that David was managed to retrieve from the site of the tragedy some of the pictures that may be on this wall today. And the thing that just backs up what you were saying about his attitude to life was that the one thing I remember about Michael, and I'll always take it with me, is that he always wanted to know what was good. Tell me about what you like, not what you don't like. Tell me about what you like. So anything that he pictures, without a doubt, he's loving it. So there might be some people might look at satire, but he loves it.
Yeah. No, I think this is kind of, there's maybe an irony, maybe a kind of humorous sort of warmth, I think, in some of the kind of images that obviously caught his eye that he wanted to photograph. And so just to sort of finish with how I got involved in the work. So I found the book, and I think just sort of, looking through who was involved in it, I was led to Millennium Images, which is a, I guess, sort of upmarket picture image kind of agency, and Jason Chennai, who's not here today, but I'm not exactly sure again how he had hold of the sort of archive of Michael's work, but obviously it had been, you know, given to him to look after, I guess, to use both for the images for kind of licensing or for the front cover of books and things, but also to try and kind of keep and retain and you know, look after and restore those that weren't in kind of good condition and kind of archive them. So with his sort of connection, we then were able to kind of go through images and make a selection. Again, I presume many of the ones that I showed were ones that you showed back in 1993 too. And I think then also still with kind of Ali's blessing, although it was, you know, many years ago, I think it was back in 2010, we put on the sort of first exhibition of his work that I had in the gallery. And again, we showed a mixture of the kind of black and white work. The ones on the back wall were all images that were available to us at the time. Everything that you see on the left-hand wall, those are all the new images which have been sort of, I guess, uncovered within the last half dozen years, and which make up the majority of the new book, American Landscapes, which features about 50 new images, but all black and white images. And we had, again, a fantastic success with the show. I mean, I had some good successful shows. We had a few duds, it has to be said, and a few that, you know, didn't seem to kind of interest people overly. But Michael's work, people loved it. And I think, I mean, as awful as it sounds, there is something also about discovering this person who you've never kind of come across, or who you've never heard of, who you feel you should have done, who you feel, I think that also speaks to why we are doing what we're doing today, and hopefully why everybody is kind of here, because we sort of feel like he should be kind of better known. There should be some degree of knowledge of Michael Ormerod and his work, however curtailed that was. So I think the work really resonated with people, and I've said this to sort of somebody over the last couple of nights when we've had a few kind of get-together evenings, that, you know, we would have a lot of photographers who would visit the gallery in Brighton. There's a lot of photographers in the UK. I think most of them live in Brighton. And they would all come in, and, you know, and there's obviously a very good photography degree course, both the sort of BA and an MA course. So we would always be very busy. We would always have lots of very, very enthusiastic people coming in, but they would never clearly buy anything, because photographers obviously mostly don't have much money, and they certainly don't have money to buy other people's photographs, because, you know, most of them do swaps and, you know, will put their own pictures up on the wall, but don't buy. And it was the first exhibition that we had in the gallery, so by that time we were going for sort of 5 years, where photographers actually bought pictures, which I think there is some sort of testament to, that they saw something in this work, or felt again like, you know, that this work was sort of significant enough, and again had not been appreciated enough, that they wanted to buy it and own it themselves and put it up on their own walls. So, you know, we had great ambitions then. We tried to, after that, get Arts Council money to do a sort of travelling show, and I think we managed to get one show again with the sort of help of Millennium 2 and with kind of Ali up in Sheffield, but it's been very, very hard, frankly, and until Ali's got much more involved and really started kind of pushing the sort of interest in it, and had the opportunity to get this book published. And it's, if anybody kind of knows anything about it, it's a very, very, very tough job to get a book published without effectively you paying for it yourself. So it's fantastic that you've been able to do that, and with that background, being able to put on this exhibition, we had the opportunity to, and got press and got people to be able to come, so that we can hopefully do, I guess, what was the ambition sort of first time round. But yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, but I think all of us do it because we really love the work, and, you know.
Well, I think with Alan and Jeff, you spent, I don't know, how long did you spend going through negatives?
A long time.
Maybe you could talk about your process of looking through the negatives to select pictures for the second book.
Yeah, it was a case of just kind of going through them methodically and kind of just picking pictures that were instantly liked, you know. But
Well, I want to say a little bit more, because by then I'd retired, and Alan, bless him, would come. He'd been teaching all day till 5 o'clock or something, and then he would go up to my place and he would look through, you know, 200 or whatever negatives,
Brilliant.
I remember him saying, "I've not seen anything like this during my day job, Jeff." I've seen that quite often. But you know, I need to pay credit to him because I've said this to you, Ali. It's a much better book for his input because you know when two people, we had. I don't think we ever had an argument, but we had a lot of discussion about pictures, certain pictures. Didn't we?
Yeah, we disagreed a few times.
Yeah, but and that was great. But you know, it was fantastic for me to have somebody else and somebody who's a really good photographer and somebody whose judgment I trust. You know, to be able to talk to him about it. So that was good. I was going to share another story about Michael that Alicia reminded me of. As everybody can see, Michael's got wonderful eye. He had a really sharp brain. He actually wasn't much of a technician, and I'm at home one night. I think I just finished watching the film. 11 o'clock at night, the phone goes. Picks the phone up. Youth. That's how we spoke to each other. Youth. It's Michael. Youth. It's Michael. Michael. He said, I'm in Albuquerque. It's sunny. He said, both my light meters have stopped working. He said, can you tell me what the exposure is? And the sad thing is, I actually could.
I think my mum's got a picture of my dad holding something over his face.
Over his eyes.
Over his eyes, and apparently he was saying, I can't look because I can't take any pictures. I've run out of film. Beautiful light.
I think the batteries are gone in his light meter or something. So yeah, so he had to blinker himself, so he couldn't take any photos that day.
I'd like to have a question. I've never really seen many photographs of England.
There was some, wasn't there?
Yeah,
Well,
very few. I mean, he went to Africa, he went to India and photographed, and he was on his way to Russia. I didn't know that. Mostly America.
I say that, but I don't think it was anything really like a serious project on England.
Why was that? When it was.
I think he was just focusing on the work side at that point.
More commercial, maybe.
And I also think, I mean, this is a cliche photography, but I think about being an outsider.
Yeah.
If you go to America or you go to Africa, you go to India, I think you see different things that people perhaps don't see or they overlook or take for granted or whatever. And, photographers talk about that. I think because there's a lot of truth in it, I think. And you're right, I mean, we're of a generation, most of us that have been brought up, we know so much about America second-hand, as it were. So when you go out, it's both, somewhere like America particularly, rather than say Africa and India, it's both strange and familiar at the same time. That's what I felt when I first went to America, I think Michael felt that.
But don't you think, like Tony Ray Jones went and spent a lot of time in America, and then he came back, and the way he photographed in Yorkshire was absolutely informed by what he'd seen in America.
Absolutely.
But it was, and so I feel pretty sure that if Michael had lived longer, he would have come back and applied all of this into something that would be in the UK in some way. I think because I think there are similarities between Tony Ray Jones and Michael.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting because Martin Parr believes that Tony Ray Jones was the greatest, inspiration and mentor and most fantastic photographer. But Martin Parr's pictures are kind of, in a way, that there's a kind of, is sardonic in a lot of the way, and Tony Ray Jones was pure, and Michael's vision is also quite pure. I mean, I think that he's not someone that's speaking from on high, looking down on anyone. He's sort of on a level with everyone. And I think that it would have been very interesting to see how he would have photographed here. We have to just imagine it.
Yeah.
Fast forward.
I mean, that Soviet Union thing sounds fascinating.
It's interesting because Seamus Murphy he's completing a book called Kingdom, that he's done a book, and it's pictures of America and pictures of Russia, but they're not titled, and the ones that you think that are American are in fact Russian. And it's really fascinating because it is like a long process that he's been photographing both in the Soviet Union and in America. It's fascinating. But I mean, I think that's another thing that, I mean, what is nice is that you've saved a lot of stuff which is really important. It's just amazing to think what he might have done too.
No, it's very odd with, I didn't realise about the Soviet thing, and I went on to start working in the Soviet Union. In fact, I've got a book that's just come out this year called The Gulag, which is on the Siberian Gulag. So what's weird is these parallel things, and it shows that the Soviet Union wasn't really I went in, I think about 82. I think it was 82, first time, and I just went for a week as a tourist, and kept hiding from the guides who were trying to kind of take you into the galleries and things, and just do my own thing. And I had an exhibition at the Photographer's Gallery based on 1 week's work. That's not because I was a great photographer, it's because there just wasn't very much material. So
No,
you'd
they
have
were
had
very good pictures.
you'd have had an amazing time in the Soviet Union if he's, you know, if he
And
wasn't
it would have
arrested.
maybe been in colour as well. He was getting the colour
Yeah,
all the time.
yeah.
Could very well have been a colour kind of project, you know.
It's like
Which
it's
would-
just
Because
black
yes,
and white.
well, no, the book, the Siberia ones,
Yeah.
but my early work was all black and white. Because I do think that there was a creative camera was the kind of the icon magazine where all photographers who took it seriously just used to look at, and it was black and white was treated very seriously, and we really didn't think, colour was more about commercial,
Yeah.
weddings.
Was that still the case still that at the time of the exhibition was colour still a little bit?
Well, I mean, photography was
Not
sort of
fully
edgy.
accepted.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
spent the 80s talking endlessly to people about the value of photography. I mean, endlessly,
Yeah.
day and night. But I mean, I think I started my gallery in 1989, having spent all the 80s in the photographer's gallery. But there was a mixture of colour and black and white going on. But I mean, we had a mixture of colour like this, colour and black and white in that original show. And in fact, both of them were really well received.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, oh, so colour isn't as good as
Yeah.
more traditional black and white. But I mean, I think, well, I mean, it's interesting to hear Richard say, like, decades later, that it's like only just taking off. But I mean,
When did you
I
stop
started
with the gallery?
20 years ago,
Right.
20,
So about the same time that I
2005.
started.
So it's like
Oh, literally, yeah. So
2005, I
me-
stopped,
that's
I
when I started.
stopped the gallery, and I'd done 17 and a half, well, altogether with the photographer's gallery, it's about 25 years
Right.
of working with photography. And now I don't have a gallery anymore, but I'm still completely, well, curating and making photography things happen.
But I'm interested to know, sorry, this suddenly feels like it's a private conversation between two people who kind of run photography galleries, but I mean, when you stopped in 2005, was there a appetite, an appreciation, an audience who were buying work to keep the gallery
I
open,
look
or
back,
enough, I should say?
think, how on earth did I do it? How did I make enough print sales to keep 4 members of staff and pay the rent, which was huge in the West End? And it was like, I think we had to turn over something like $750,000 in a year in order to maintain the sort of, and now I think, how did I actually manage to do that? I had to turn it over, so like 50% or 40%. But then by the time we gave people discounts, it was like, it's like slivers of, I don't know quite, and I never owed anybody any money ever, which was also quite, because galleries did come and go and they would just slide away quite quickly. So it was like, it was very hard, but now I can look back and think, I did that. But so yes, there were people buying, but it used to be that a lot of American people, a lot of international people would come through London, and I think with Brexit, that an awful lot of that has stopped.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people that already, I mean, I used to take work out, always took work. I was at Michael's work to ABAD, the big photography show in New York every year.
Right.
And I always did one of the European art fairs as well, like I never did Basel, but I went to the Cologne art fair, I did things in Paris, I did a European thing and an American thing. And I don't know how I afforded to do that either. I mean, now I look back and think, how did I ever do it? But I mean, it's because I did believe in it. I utterly believed in it. I still do.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's also like, people have no idea that you take risks with a gallery. Like, nobody had ever heard of Michael Ormerod, and then I thought that the work was amazing.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is interesting, out of all of the shows I've ever done, there's 2 of Michael's pictures that I have on my walls at home that that are part of my life now, because I think they're, in my bedroom I have is a different ones in the drive-in movie this year.
Okay.
And then in my kitchen I've got Eat,
Oh,
that
yeah.
really lovely one with the sign is in my kitchen. So I mean, I really do like his work very much indeed. I think he's good.
Well, I think, again, I think you have to be, sometimes you put on shows because you think they're going to be sort of commercially successful and because there'll be an audience for it. And sometimes you do it because you just love the work. I mean, and that's how it feels to me when I was sort of growing up and with my dad, he worked with artists that he loved and had a relationship with. And it was very, the sort of economics was never the kind of the first question in his head. It was about people whose work he found something exciting in, and his passion and enthusiasm for it would convince people to buy it. But in those days there were a handful of galleries, so if you had an interest in art and if you had the wherewithal financially to be able to buy it, you weren't overwhelmed. So galleries in those days very much were a sort of a portal, if you like, towards the art that you could buy, and if it wasn't through a gallery, it was very hard to do it. Now you are overwhelmed with choices to buy art, whether it's kind of online, through art fairs. It has become very, very democratic, which clearly is a good thing, albeit it makes it very hard, I think, to find something like Michael's work and to really give it the oxygen of kind of of opportunity that sometimes you kind of need, because it's not anymore a handful of galleries who are curating and saying there is something very, very kind of significant about this artist's work. We advise you to look at it and kind of buy it. So, but I think regardless of that, it's just work that it's one of those projects that for me has always been a sort of labour of love. I think the word labour sounds awful, but I love the work, and so I have felt invested in it and have always wanted to show it. And like Zelda, I have 2 of his prints too, which I,
Which prints do you have?
I've got this man with the newspaper over his face, which I just sort of love. I mean, it's one of those pictures which could be from the sort of 1920s, it could be sort of a Paul Strand, or I don't know, but there is something, the sort of angles and sort of geometry of it, and there are little details that you see, well, you don't see at first, but you kind of see when you look more closely, sort of shadows of the kind of lady on the left, and again, it's one of those pictures which it could have been done in a second, but he could have spent hours. I mean, obviously he couldn't spend hours because you can't make this man stop from walking with this sort of newspaper covering his face. Whether the guy knew he was being sort of photographed, I don't know. There are just elements to it that I really, really love. And then the other one is this one, because I find it the most unsettling, interesting sort of picture. You have this rather sort of picturesque, rural, agricultural kind of America. And then you have this little kid wearing a ice hockey mask, which...
What room do you have that in?
Say that again?
What room do you have that in?
I've got that in my office. Yeah. So yeah, it wasn't, I mean, interesting you asked that though, because I had clients at the gallery, because that was one that we featured when we had our show in Brighton.
Where do you have it, hon?
I've got it in my office.
In your office?
Yeah.
We have it in the entrance hall.
We do have it.
That's on my
Certainly observe how people.
Yeah.
My house is mine and my husband's house is a shrine. We've got my dad's pictures every room.
Well, I was going to add, I don't think Michael would have had an issue with the use of the word labour at all.
Okay.
An old friend got in touch with you outwardly, didn't he, and said that Michael said 2 things he was most happy he'd done in his life was joining the Labour Party and growing peas. I've never met the man, but that's an insight.
It's
Did you
funny
say
how
growing peas?
growing peas.
Peas.
I was going to say, it's funny how you said there was lots of previous girlfriends that came in, because I've lost count of the amount of people that have contacted me and told me that they were my dad's best friend.
He was everyone's best friend.
For me, doing this project, I've had so many conversations and hilarious stories to do with my dad, and it's just been an amazing way for me to connect to my dad through the people that knew him and the photos that he took.
I mean, there were men that came in that liked it.
Well, actually, last night we had a bit of a party with all my dad's best friends, and they were saying that they would all sleep together in the same bed at the end of the night.
I remember the parties in the house. The house is always full of people. Lots of fun. Yeah.
I love what you said about obviously from the photos that he was on the level with the people, and Ali's been with me in America for the last 6 months with Michael's camera, and that's a hard thing to do, isn't it, to be on the level with the people that you're trying to engage with, like, and so it's very cool to hear that you see that.
Oh, I can definitely see it. Yeah.
I have an anecdote about Michael's beginning in photography. He, growing up and going through his education, he never had any faintest idea what he wanted to do. So my father was an industrialist, persuaded to do economics, which was totally unsuited, but he had a damn good time at Hull University. He then had a job as a buyer for a pottery company in Stoke. And then he had a friend who he met who was in photography, and they got talking, he got very interested in it. And he then committed himself to do photography. The first time in his life he found out what he wanted to do. So he gave them a week's notice, characteristically. And, oh, sorry, before I get there, he went for his interview at Trent with a borrowed photographs, saying that this was his work. He'd actually never taken a photograph in his life. He didn't have a camera. But the people in Trent, of course, were
You've got some
pretty
similar
wise,
stories.
and they took him on.
Well, I met Paul Hill the other week, who was the course leader at the time,
Oh, really?
and told him this story, and he had no idea. He said he only let people on the course that he liked anyway.
I'm sure he got in on his personality, but the picture's probably neither here nor there in some ways.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
This is my first real big exposure to Michael's work, which I particularly love, the black and white. I've almost seen two photographers because I feel the colour approach is so different to the black and white, which as a photographer myself I know is easily done. As Zelda introducing me now more and more to photographers, reportage photographers, I'm learning more and more about them. And I've always found it difficult to say the same thing with colour and black and white. To me it's very obvious here. I wondered what any of your experience was, Barry, with that. Did the same thing happen to you?
Well, I decide when I'm going, when I arrive, because I did a lot of travelling, I would decide whether I'm going to shoot colour or black and white. The main reason I changed from my commercial work from black, I used to work for Radio Times a lot in the 70s, and I suddenly realised they were paying £75 a shoot for black and white and 150 for colour. It's a no-brainer, really. And that's how I started going into colour. But often when you, in the Soviet Union, where I've done quite a lot of work, when I first went, it's all black and white, and it seemed right. But I did a story on a Spanish village where I brought loads. I only used to use Kodachrome, so different from Michael. I was really surprised he got that quality out of colour neg, because colour neg wasn't. I never used to think it could. My colour neg never looked like that. I brought mainly colour with me, but as soon as I got to this village where it was a series called The Last of the Old Europe, I just saw it as a black and white story, and it was the right decision. But then I went back to the Soviet Union to do Siberia in the winter. I did a story on gulags, and I thought I wanted to kind of do that in colour, so you had this kind of an edge between the beauty of the place and the horror of what was going on. And I think it's an instinctive, I think a lot of it's an instinctive thing, which you know,
Do you feel that about his
oh,
work?
completely. No, I think that there are a lot. I think the black and white obviously a lot more influenced by people like Winograd or Frank, and there's more people in the pictures.
There's more drama.
There's more drama, yes. Whereas these are almost stills from a film.
Yes.
That's why I'm saying Wim Wenders, and often, even the person when they're close with the bubble gum, they're a part of something else. He's using. It's not about them, except for that the one of the American Indian looking straight to camera. There's very little engagement with the camera, whereas these are kind of.
I think the colour is mainly medium format as well, isn't it?
Is it?
I think so.
Oh, because
yeah.
you see,
That's gonna make a
they
difference.
are they?
So you're going to be slower process and maybe not
See.
using it.
Oh, I'm glad about that. That's
Yeah.
why
I
you're
think
getting
that's the
that
case.
quality.
Yeah.
I think there might be another reason as well. I wonder if how important this is. When he took most of the black and white, it was on his own. When he took the colour, it was travelling with Ali's mum. And you know, as a photographer, sometimes if you go out on your own, I think you're in a different headspace than if you go out with somebody else. And I got a feeling that that's part of what we see. It doesn't tell the whole story perhaps, but I think that's part of what we see. Ali's mum would have been with him when he took these pictures, but for the most of.
She actually wasn't, because Ali was young. On this trip, she wasn't there.
Oh, that's right, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Forget that then.
That's
That's not my first idea I've ever had that somebody said that. Probably up with the last.
It sounded good then.
They're in spirit, yeah.
There's at least one picture I can remember in the original book that's in black and white that looks like these, and that's medium format. There's one of the tree from a distance, and the scale of it and that.
Yeah, some of the desert ones are reminiscent of these.
Yeah. So the format
The dead
seems
tree.
to be the dead tree. The format seems to
Did
be.
you want to say?
There's a photograph that I've got a copy of that Michael's partner, Sam Ann, gave to me after he died. And it's a pickup truck in Albuquerque. It's black and white, and the pickup truck is absolutely covered in plastic figures that have been glued to the bonnet, the roof, the doors. It's a landscape of toy soldiers, Action Man, Mr. Potato Head, a plastic pineapple, ice, ice cube holder. It's just covered. He said, so the story was, he only had black and white with him on that day. He said, that's all I could shoot with. But, he said, the fade of the colours in the New Mexico sun was something else. And I believe he intended to go back to try and find that truck again, but he was on such a tight schedule he had to explain. So that's a photograph we never saw, but I'd love to see. You just visualise. So now when I hear that, I look at a black and white photograph and I'm thinking, what does that look like in colour?
Well, and because this colour drugs scene, we've got a black and white rainy day scene of exactly the
He's
same
gone back.
place that he's come back to.
Well, it's easy to say after the fact, but you kind of feel like, you know, the choice of black and white or colour pretty much suits every image. I mean, which obviously is kind of easy to say when you are sort of surrounded by them, but there is something about the colour work and the locations of the pictures. I don't know, the kind of, I don't know whether he had moved further kind of to Western sort of states, but there is something that feels like the light out there, the space out there is kind of on a kind of bigger, more dramatic scale. It's almost like Technicolor, and it almost feels like it needs to be seen in
all of the
Technicolor.
colours are about sort of emptiness, even when they're shot windows.
Yeah.
I mean, even things like the Marilyn Monroe with all the wedding shoes.
Oh, yeah.
It's about kind of, it's really from a point of isolation that he's, I mean, like that one I think there, that he's observing, and this, to have people in it were completely ruined.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's about his observing. It's so quiet, and it's very much that sort of the quiet eye. That he's not intruding upon it. But there is something really. It is nostalgic, but it's. I think there's a loneliness in a lot of the work actually, and that's obviously not so much when he was traveling with your mum, but I think that there is a real loneliness. And I think a lot of photographers do feel terribly lonely because it's a very solitary profession. And I think that it's very evident. I mean, whenever I had the exhibition, I remember feeling terribly sad about seeing some of the loneliness that was in the pictures. It just felt very constantly there.
Well, I think that picture of the girl blowing
Yeah.
the bubble gum, you know, to me that sort of epitomizes the sort of, I don't know, that essence, the sort of mood of a lot of the pictures. You know, there is light, but there is a lot of darkness that the pictures do, but there is a sort of...
And we have, I don't know who is, we have an outtake of that. There is actually a second girl with her
Right.
blowing another bubble gum.
Really?
Yeah, and I
funny.
wonder what happened when he took that one. Where did she go? Like, where is
Right.
she? Yeah.
But he's excited taking that one because it's obviously been pouring with rain. It's just broke through. The late afternoon sun is just landing on, and you just know how exciting. You know you've got a good picture.
Yeah.
This is nowadays people would just look at the back of the camera and say I've got a good picture, but then it's not until you get back.
Yeah, the excitement.
But you know when you've got, you know.
But also it sums up so much about America in that particular era. We were not the era of trainers. I mean, having white sneakers on is like such an American thing. Because I remember taking my son to Disney World, and he was wearing leather Clark sandals, and everyone was staring at his feet because it was like it should be like trainers. And I looked along these queues, and everyone in America was wearing sneakers. And so, I mean, that does sort of epitomise that sort of era of America.
Iconic.
And so, David, because I actually didn't know that these were ones that you recovered, so my dad would never have seen these developed.
Or wasn't that a strange thought?
Yeah.
And we lost a lot.
Yeah.
So how many did you find?
I don't know, about a dozen or something.
About a
Or-
dozen?
I think I remember about a dozen or maybe 10. But he had more than that burnt out in the car.
Yeah.
Because they're all covered in paper as well. So they weren't. If they were medium format, they would have been roll paper with the film.
There was some 35mm as well.
Was there?
Yeah.
Because
your
that one
parents
looks
still
like
alive?
35.
No, they died later.
But they were terribly proud of the exhibition. I do remember them being there, and they were very moved by seeing his pictures. I remember that they were, I mean, they were in the gallery a lot at the beginning.
Well, my dad never gave me brother credit at all.
In his
He didn't
lifetime.
like photography. He didn't like anything artistic. And so my brother had to fight his way through that for a lot of years.
Yes, it was definitely your mum that was more vocal about the exhibition. But he was actually terribly pleased because people were saying such nice things about the work, so that your father was, definitely your grandparents, they were actually, it was a feather in Michael's cap, I think.
Yeah. My dad helped to publish the book.
He did. Yeah, he put.
That's good.
It's very important.
But it was tough for him for a long while.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a shame that they're not still here, but I'm sure that if they're looking down, they would be quite happy about today.
It's Michael's response that would be interesting.
Yes, exactly. What would he say? He probably wouldn't like
Oh, he'd be bullied.
You say,
Slightly embarrassed.
you say you see the ones that got away.
Yeah. He would now be very much more experienced, wouldn't he? He'd be,
Yeah. And he would look like, oh, but this is old work. You've got to see what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
he wouldn't have stopped.
No, he would not have stopped. I'm quite sure of that. No, it's interesting.
It's all due to Jeff, really.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is
No, it's
actually all to Jeff, the
Alan was
rallying this
I
and
know.
constant
couldn't have done it without
encouragement.
Alan, or you, Ali, for
Yeah.
that matter. So,
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so
thanks,
much for
everybody.
coming. Yeah, and
Well,
thank
if anybody else has got a last sort
Yeah.
of question, and then we'll let everybody get out into the sunshine.
Do you mind if I ask a question? I hope it's not too mundane. But